Thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live for Investment Insight this month. Obviously, this month is the month of the fair in Warren County. So tonight, we'll be doing our Investment Insight next week instead of tonight because of the Warren County Fair. Quick little disclaimer, Investment Insight's an educational space. We do our best to provide accurate information, but please seek out competent legal, financial, and law advice on your unique situation before making any decisions. So a couple cool things for the summary today. As we talk about is the scaled down tax bill. You guys saw yesterday the new tax bill that the Biden administration has proposed constantly is getting changed. So we're going to talk today about the House and the Senate have dramatically different versions on what the new tax bill should look like. And so the House is wanting to have much higher taxes than the Senate, and now the House is lowering some of those taxes. Some of those tax increases appear to be out the window now. New Irs Enforcement. If you weren't aware, the IRS is asking Congress to change what they know about you and to increase some information gathering from banking services. A market update. And there is a correction looming. Obviously, the month of September tends to be the weakest month historically for investors, as it's kind of a lull, which is we're going to talk about why that's the case a little bit, but that's nothing to fear. September tends to be a weak time for the stock market. So a couple of little quotes. Happily we bask in the warm September sun, which illuminates all creatures. Henry David Thoreau. This is an interesting little, happily we bask in this warm September sun, which illuminates all creatures. It's pretty nice to get a little cooler. The weather is pretty nice. It's something I didn't really say, but it really is. I ran this morning, and I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier to run 8.5 miles when it feels like this than it is when it's 95 degrees. This is an interesting little story. So men need not apply to the world's largest e-scooter factory. So led by Bhavish Agarwal Allah, electric scooter facility in India is aiming to build 10 million two-wheel scooters annually. 10 million scooters, but it's an all-women business. It's about 2.5 hours southeast of Bangalore, India, and the goal is to employ over 10,000 women, and men aren't allowed to work there. Which is very interesting because you think about, we talk about what's going on in Afghanistan and America and how different the world is for men and women. And in India, which has a caste system, they're talking about a factory just for women workers. Thought that was kind of interesting little tidbit. The interesting funny thing is it's backed by the Japanese Central Bank Investment Fund and Tiger Management, which is also, both those companies are owned by two men, basically. And one's Tiger's by some men, and then the other SoftBank is a Japanese company, which Japan tends to be a male-dominated society. So you probably never heard of this company before. I don't know if you guys have heard. 9/11, of course, was this weekend. But there's a company out there named Cantor Fitzgerald. You probably never heard of them, but they were the largest dealer, or one of the largest dealers in U.S. Treasuries. So whenever the government borrows money, who do they borrow from? Who does the government, the United States tend to borrow most of the money from? Banks. Yeah, most of it's from banks. And so when banks and U.S. investment companies buy treasury bonds, someone's got to sell it to them, right? And so Cantor Fitzgerald historically was the largest company to do it. Well, when the Twin Towers hit, when the first plane hit the North Tower, I believe, was the first one that got hit, Cantor Fitzgerald's office was 2 floors above where the plane hit. Well, when that plane hit, it blocked all of the exit stairways on those floors. So anybody on the top floors died. So all 658 employees that were there that day all died. So you think about the 2,900 people that died on 9/11, 658 of them were in one company. And the CEO his brother died, but he missed dying because he was taking his son to his first day of kindergarten. That was the only reason why he wasn't there. But out of this tragedy, the company does some pretty cool things. They lost most of their staff, and what's oddly about it is the U.S. Treasury market had to move to London. So when our government borrowed money, Cantor Fitzgerald, their operations were mainly in London that kept the company going. So the London office was buying U.S. Treasuries. Out of the tragedy, one of the things the employees forego 25% of their salary to families who lost loved ones. Yeah. It's not working. This is on. Try it now. Okay, so but what's cool about Cantor Fitzgerald is 25% of employees' salary they give to families that lost loved ones from the company. So even to this day, 20 years later, 25% of the salaries of the employees of the company are going to other people. And then each year, the firm sets aside all money it makes in one day and gives it to charities for disaster relief efforts. About $12 million. So it's pretty cool out of the tragedy, some of the things that are happening this day. And I think that's really important when we think of 9/11. We think of all the ill things that happened that day. But isn't it, granted, I don't even know how many, I think it was 17 terrorists what they did. There were supposed to be 18. How terrible what 17 or 18 people did, but isn't it great how much people, basically thousands and millions of people did to help in the situation? That's the more endearing story to me, when you look at the situation. So one of the things we saw today, which, girls, if you don't mind, we can come up past these out. We're going to change it up a little bit in Genesis. So one of the things that we're seeing here is, and we noticed that this morning, is this entire year, we have seen high inflation. The prices of goods and services rising dramatically. And what we're starting to notice, though, is it looks like inflation is starting to cool down. This morning, the CPI, or inflation reading, showed a sharp decrease in inflation. So a lot of things we saw this summer and spring, where prices are going crazy, where housing is going up, it appears as though inflation is finally starting to cool down. Now, what's interesting is, if you look at the second page right here, look at this chart. You guys are going to bring this chart up. On this chart, it shows you inflation. I should have got the color version how I look at this. But the top line is the United States. The second line is the Eurozone. Well, the dotted lines is where they anticipate inflation to go, and the solid line is where it has gone. As you saw when COVID first hit, the prices of goods and services started going down. But early this year, when the government passed their big stimulus bill, you see that the prices went up dramatically. It's always interesting to me when the government prints money. The government says they're going to make you rich by printing money. Is that possible? No, because when you print more money, everything costs more. So especially if you don't have a lot of money, that's a big deal. Because if everything costs more, you can't afford to buy anything. So it's very stupid economic policy, but that's what they've done. But as we're seeing here, though, as all this money is being spent, what's happening to it? Yeah, people that spend it don't save any of it. So the people that are saving it tend to what? Save it. People that are savers, it doesn't matter if they make $1 million or they make $100. They're going to probably what? Save some of it. I always remember we were talking about my family before you guys came in, and my grandmother was a cafeteria cook at East Side School in Rock Island, and she never made more than $12,000 or $15,000 a year, but she saved $12,000 to $15,000 a year. She saved every dollar she made because she had a farm, and it was paid for. They didn't have any debt. They didn't drive my grandpa had a 1980 Ford. When he died, guess what they had? 1980 Ford. Didn't have air conditioning. The gas thing didn't work. You could never tell them, it always was so empty. But guess what? It was usually half full. So when we come down, my dad, the first thing I do is go fill the gas tank up. Now remember, we only see them every 6 months. What's the first thing we're doing? Filling the gas tank up, because it hasn't been used. They haven't only used that much gas in 6 months. And so when you think about it, though, so people are either savers or spenders. And you see that in our office. It's very clear that most of the people in our office probably save too much money. And if they spend too much money, they don't have any investments. Well, as we look at what's happening with inflation, when you give money to a bunch of people that spend the money, they tend to spend it very, quickly. And so when they spend it very quickly, prices go up, and then what happens next? They eventually start leveling off. Now, what's different about this situation is when you print 30% more money than we had before, we're probably not going to see prices go down much, but they're going to stop going what? Up. And we're starting to see that. If you look at the real estate market, if you just drive around town, the smaller, lower priced homes are still selling very quickly, but the bigger, more expensive homes are starting to what? They're too expensive. Nobody can afford them. And so we're starting to see that first sign. And this is very interesting because this plays into what we're talking about. You know, one of the things that President Biden wants to do is he wants to spend another $4.6 trillion. Now, I don't know about you, but the more I hear these kind of numbers, I start thinking about the game of Monopoly. Like, this is just, I mean, give us how big is $4.6 trillion? Wait. Look how much money that is. And when you start looking at that, when you do that, and we already saw this, we talked about this last month when we looked at savings account data, where the average American had 30% more in their savings account than they did a year ago. Do poor people have savings accounts or checking accounts? No. They use cash call places or they use debit cards. They don't tend to even have a savings or checking account because they don't want to pay overdraft fees and they don't tend to like them. And so, by definition, a checking account is going to be somebody that's lower middle class to somebody that's wealthy. So all that money went from the poor people to where? The richer people. And we see that in the data. And so, as we start seeing inflation dropping, and we see the market trying to figure out what's next, this tells me, and if you look at Biden's tax bills being revised, that it's very likely that what Biden originally proposed is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They're not going to get to spend that much money because they don't have the what? The votes. And they shouldn't, because this concept does not help poor people. Who does it help? Rich people. Because all that money is going to be spent and it's all going to what? Go into the rich people's hands. I mean, that's just the bottom line. I mean, I'm not trying to speak politics here, but that's the bottom line on investing. And we're seeing that with inflation. The United States, as you can see in this chart, we spent a lot more money than everybody else. So our inflation went way up. Other countries didn't, so what are they not seeing? They're not seeing so much inflation. Now, to give you an example of how crazy this is, I haven't looked at it recently, but we had 58 ships off the coast of Long Beach in Los Angeles trying to unload stuff from China. The most ever recorded. It's costing over, I haven't looked at the data this month, but last month it was $10,000 to ship a container from China to the United States. It used to be about $2,000. Shipping companies are posting a record profit because all these goods are coming from China, full of stuff. They come here and they go back what? Empty. So we're seeing one of the biggest economic challenges there. And so on the surface, you would think that would encourage more businesses because it would be cheaper to make stuff in America. But they can't find workers. That causes the second problem. And so, but when we see this, all this stuff appears to be temporary because as the Christmas season comes to a close, we'll probably have a very strong Christmas season. But if they don't pass a really big stimulus bill, what's going to end up happening? It's going to start leveling out. And then next year is an election year, right? Yep. And odds are, the party in power tends to what? Tends to lose the next time around. And so if Congress splits to be Republican and Democrat, what's going to get done? Nothing. That's pretty common, and that's true for American history. So let's talk about what is in the tax code. Okay. So obviously they want to spend a lot of money, but the original bill, so there's two bills. There's a stimulus bill, which is $3.5 trillion. By the way, I got my numbers wrong. It's actually $5 trillion is what he wanted to spend, not 4.5. $300 trillion. But 10 to 12 Democrats in the House and 2 Democrats in the Senate are saying, wait a minute, we're spending too much money and we're accruing too much debt. So we need to cut this down. This is crazy. We're spending too much money. So what's the bill going to eventually look like? So originally, if you guys, anybody know what the SALT deduction is? Salt is for food. I think we eat a lot of salt. We do eat a lot of salt. So the SALT is a state and local tax deduction. What this is if you live in a state with an income tax, you can deduct what you pay in state income taxes off your federal tax return. So if you live in a state like California or New York, where the income tax is 12 to 13%, 17 in New York City. Yeah, New York City, it's even higher because of the local tax. So let's say you paid 17% taxes in New York City. Would you like to take that off your federal tax return? Yeah. But then what that happens is, if you're in a state like Tennessee, which doesn't have an income tax and has very low local taxes, we end up paying a higher percentage of our income to fund the federal government than they do. So one of the things they did in the 2017 tax law is they eliminated that deduction. And they said that New York and New Jersey, we don't care what you do, but you're not getting a deduction because of how you run your state. Of course, if you look at the political map, right, is our state more Republican or Democrat representatives? Republican. Is New York more Democrats or Republicans? Democrats. So who's more mad about that deduction? The Democratic Party, because they're in New York. But the funny part about it is, most of the people it affects are wealthy people in those states. And remember, one of the main things with taxes is they want to reduce the taxes to the rich people. That's what they say, but that's what they're talking about doing. And so one of the biggest things that those states want to fix is they want to let New York, New Jersey, California start deducting that money. But that's actually a tax cut for New York and New Jersey, and a tax increase for Tennessee. You see how that plays in? And the same thing was true when Trump was president. He raised taxes on people in New York and New Jersey and lowered them in Tennessee. And so you see how, depending on who's in charge, where they're from, that depends on what they think is right and wrong. So originally in the bill, they were going to restore this tax break. But in the current bill, they leave that tax increase in there. Because remember, there's a process called reconciliation. Reconciliation says that whatever you spend today, you have to break even within 10 years, somehow, or within 8 years. You can't increase the debt 8 years from now. You can increase. It's crazy the way our government works because it's definitely written by a bunch of lawyers. You know, the rules are like, well, this rule applies to this. I mean, where did that rule come from? It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Ten Commandments. So where did the rule come from? And so that's what they have to do. So now that they're realizing they want to spend all this money, they can't spend all that money unless they do what? Increase taxes. You can't spend money in reconciliation without increasing taxes. And so when we look at the process here, the corporate tax rate. If you guys remember, back in 2016, the corporate tax rate was 35%. Biden, right now, it's 21%. Biden wanted it to be 28%. Now they're talking about 26.5%. Oddly enough, do you guys know what the tax rate is in China in places that aren't doing well? 0. You know how China got the money to rebuild their country? United States, Taiwan, and Japan. Because what they did is they said, if we go in, we can do the same thing in America. If we went into St. Louis, where I grew up, where the city's gone from being the second largest city in the United States in 1900 to now the 25th city, there was like 1 million people living in St. Louis in 1900, and now 230,000 people live there. So when you drive through St. Louis, you know there's all those abandoned buildings? Because there used to be 700,000 more people living there than there do now. So they could go into St. Louis and say, anybody that puts a business in St. Louis pays no corporate taxes. You think businesses would move there? Oh yeah. There'd be tons of people getting jobs. All those people that live, and by the way, unemployment in that part of St. Louis is the highest in the city of St. Louis. So if you had no taxes there, you think they'd have jobs? You better believe it, because the companies would be there for tax reasons. And so what China has done to rebuild their economy is they've done that. The actual Mexican president proposed doing that at the U.S. border, but he never did it, unfortunately. He said he was going to do 20 miles around the Mexican border, make it a zero tax zone, because that would get the United States to rebuild that entire part of Mexico. I wish he would have done it, because that would have been really positive for the country. And so that's what we're talking about, is 26.5 to 20. By the way, when you tax a corporation, is that a person? Anybody met Mr. McDonald's? Who's Mr. McDonald's? Who's that rich Mr. McDonald's? Who is it? Yeah. Everybody in this room. Everybody that owns stock in the company. When you raise the tax on a corporation, you're really raising the tax on people. So when you say, man, I hate that evil company, Walmart, I hope you don't have any shares in it, because you're the owner. You own Walmart. Because Walmart's a publicly traded corporation. When you say you hate Walmart, it says you hate Americans. That's because corporations aren't people. They're just a tax entity. Right? Give you an example. So, the Mayflower. You guys heard of the Mayflower? The Mayflower was the first corporation, not the first, but the first English corporation in the United States. And it was a Mayflower Compact. It was an agreement. All the guys that won that ship had an agreement to come into the country and how it's going to be run. And it was just a contract. That was a corporation. On the first one, 1600. So, capital gains tax. Right now, the top tax, Biden wanted the capital gains tax to be 39.6% for certain people. He wanted to eliminate long-term capital gains. He now lowered that goal to 28.8%. And of course, the current level is 23.8%. So that capital gains tax is going down. Another big thing is they want to raise income. If you make more than $5 million a year, they want a new income bracket of 42.6% from the 37% it is today. Another big thing is they're eliminating the capital gains tax on farms if you die. So let me give you an example. One of the things they talked about is you have something called stepped up cost basis. So, when my grandma died in 2006, I don't know the year, but I believe it was either 1893 or 1902. In 1902, my family bought 200 acres of my farm for $3,000. Okay? My grandpa, who was born in 1902, died in 1996. So for 94 years, did we have to pay any taxes on that depreciation? No. And when my grandpa died, we didn't have to pay any taxes because it went to my grandma. And then in 2006, when my grandma died, we didn't have to pay any taxes because they raised the inheritance tax level. So we were able to keep my family farm. One of the things they talked about doing is, let's say that farm, 200 acres, is now worth, it's not worth this, but let's say it's worth $1 million. If you paid, $3,000 for it, and it's worth $1 million now, how much capital gains do you have to pay? A lot, right? And so let's say $238,000. Okay? But if my family keeps the farm in the family, we don't have to pay anything. And then if I sell it after my grandparents died, I could then sell it and not pay any taxes. Now, I probably don't agree with that. I think if you sell it, you should have to pay taxes because you made money. That's my opinion. I think it's inconsistent with the tax law. If I got to pay it when I sell stock, I should have to pay if I sell it. But if I keep it and I don't sell it, I don't think I should have to pay taxes. because I didn't sell it, right? Well, they were talking about changing that. Whereas if someone died when you inherited it, they considered it a sale. And so you have to pay taxes on a farm. So let me get it straight. My grandparents died, and then now I got to pay $230,000 in taxes. What a great gift they just gave me. Right? And that was in the tax bill. They have since done what? Eliminated that, because there's a lot of senators from these states called Montana, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, West Virginia, and they have some pretty big farms out there. Do you think they give money to politics? Yeah. Do they want to lose their family farm? Does it? I mean, you want to talk about good TV? Get a bunch of family farmers to get on TV saying they killed my grandpa died from COVID and then they took my farm. Did that make TV news? I'd say it would. So they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that before what? An election that's coming in next year. Right? And so they've taken that out. Big shocker. So what the bottom line is, what we're seeing is, what's funny is, all the stuff they want to spend money on, the only thing we're really getting is they want to increase the child credit. Right now, they will pay you $3,600 per child this year in tax credits. That's the only thing. They're talking about raising taxes, but what they're not really talking about. What are they going to do with all that money? I mean, to me, if I was in Congress, right, the first thing I would say is, what does our country need? What do we need to fix? Right? Wouldn't that be the first thing you say? If you're the government, you're going to spend money. Shouldn't the first thing you ask yourself is what? What do you need the money for? And then you figure out, okay, well, let's say that, we're here in Coffee County, we don't have enough school buses. So the first thing we start saying is, well, what do we need? We need school buses. Hey, we need a fire truck that can get to the nursing home over here, which is a real conversation I had 5 years ago. We don't have a pole big enough staircase to get up there and save those people. So what do they have to do? Spend $1 million on a new fire truck. Right? So you start off with the need, and then you start off with, we'll raise the money to pay for it. Right? And of course, what they did with the fire truck is they did it over a couple of years versus it being all at once. But here, what they're doing is they're raising taxes before they tell us what they're going to spend it on. Right? So, but what we are starting to see is originally they wanted to spend $1.5 trillion on stimulus, $1.5 trillion on infrastructure, roads and bridges, $3.5 trillion on stimulus. And we're now starting to see the stimulus bill is going to be about $500 billion. And I don't know if this bill ever even gets passed. They'll probably pass something, but it's not going to be what they wanted originally. Right? So it's very common with politicians, right? They run for office, they say what?
Cut taxes.
I'm going to cut taxes, raise taxes, I'm going to do all these things. And then when push comes to shove, what do they start saying? We'll just do a little change. So, but that's what we're looking to build. And that's probably a good thing for investors, because one of the biggest concerns the stock market has had is if you raise taxes on stocks, they're worth less money. If you raise taxes on stocks, they're going to be worth less money. If you raise taxes on real estate, it's worth what? Less money. And so that's the thing, that's why in our state we do a great thing here. We do the sales tax. You know why the sales tax? Because it captures everybody, and you can't really hide from it, and you can't really cheat on it, right? You buy I bought a Snickers this morning when I was running, and guess what I had to pay? I had to pay sales tax. And they got me when I was running. I couldn't think of a way to get out of it. You understand what I'm saying? I guess I could have stolen it. But there was pretty much no way. I was walking out of that gas station with that Snickers bar. Right? And so they capture it at point of sale, which is much smarter. And that's really, if you think about our country, I wish we moved to that system. Because people that make more money tend to what? Spend more money. My grandma, who never made more than $15,000 a year, never spent a lot of money. She never made the money. But my father does very well. He spends a lot more money than my grandma does. Right? Because he makes more money. So in that way, a wealthier person pays more taxes? Because they spend more. And that would be better for investors. But that's what we're looking. We'll have more on this as time goes on with the tax bills and what's happening with reconciliation. But it looks like all the promises they made appear to be waning. And I think part of that also involves what happened in Afghanistan. When your approval numbers are great and you're looking really good, you can get a lot more done than what? When you flee a country like that. It doesn't look good. So, that's how it works. Okay. So a lot of people always talk about, and I always hear it, every time the market has a little bit of a drop, we always hear, is a correction coming? And I guess as I get older, unfortunately, I have a hard time being as sympathetic as I should be. Because the answer is yes. Yes, a correction's coming. Yes, it's going to happen. Yes, we are going to see corrections. How many corrections do you guys think we usually get in a year? Typical year. About 4. This year we've only had 1. So here we are in September. Are we past the halfway point? Right? We're here at September 14th. We've had 1 5% drop in February. We tend to have 3 5% drops and 1 10% drop every year. Every year. And we tend to have every 3.5 years, we tend to have a 20% drop. Right? So corrections are, what would you say? Normal. I've been investing since I was 12 years old, so I'm 38. So for the last 26 years, I've seen a lot of corrections. Right? If you remember last year, when the stock market dropped, how many people thought it wasn't going to come back very quickly? Almost everybody. When COVID first hit, what did everybody start saying? Well, this is different. I've never seen it like this, right? But historically, it's funny to me, people that, maybe shouldn't say this, but a lot of people don't want to get vaccinated. And they act like this is the first time our country's ever tried to vaccinate people. You know what I had to do before my son James go to kindergarten? What did I have to do? He had to get shots. What are those shots? Vaccines? Because what they're saying is, for you to be around my kids, you got to be vaccinated. So that you don't kill who? My kids. And people act like, well, this is some new thing. This has been going on forever. Getting vaccinated. And so, not forever, but for modern history. And so, if you were to run into an analyst and that guy would say, you know what, Rob? There's going to be corrections. Thanks to it's going to rain this week too. Did you guys know that? It's not much of a prediction, right? If you're going to say, as an investor, you're like, I remember Nostradamus, right? He made some crazy predictions. You guys know this, Kimberly Genesis? He said there's going to be a war, a big war, in 100-year century. No kidding. I think there's going to be, I'll make a prediction for you. There's going to be 2 wars next year. You guys write it down, see if I'm right. These aren't hard predictions, right? Because there's going to be war, there's going to be famine, there's going to be drought, there's going to be all these things. There is. It's just, there's drought right now in Argentina. There's drought in California. And what do we have here in Tennessee? Too much rain. Right? And so that's just how the world works. And so when you hear people saying that stuff, it's really interesting to me because it's like, they're really asking these people to say this on TV. And people act like, I don't know, maybe it's harder as I get older because I'm like, I've heard this before, but hearing this forever. I actually hear this every week. For my entire investment life, for the last 15 years of managing money, I've heard people say there's going to be a correction soon. Doesn't mean anything, but it will happen. So, September. The biggest issue with corrections is, okay, so there's a correction. Let's say you lost 5% of your money in the market this week. Do you feel like it's going to come back? Do you feel like, if I had to ask you, do you think Walmart's a pretty strong company? 10 years ago, did people feel that way? No, not really. They thought Amazon was taking their business over, and they're doing it. So what did Walmart have to do? Adapt or die. Now the thing about the S&P 500 is if Walmart dies, who's going to win the most money? Who would do the best if Walmart? If Walmart went bankrupt tomorrow, what stock's going to make the most money off of it? Dollar General? Would kill it. Dollar General would go crazy. And who else? Farmer Supply, Amazon, FedEx, right? Because everybody would start getting what? So when one company dies, what ends up happening? Anybody remember Kmart or Venture? Those were big companies when I was a kid. What's that? Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe that is. I don't even know what it is, Gary. That's the thing. JCPenney catalog, right? And they're still around, but they're kind of going down. As a kid, what's the first thing I do? It sounds bad, but I like the JCPenney catalog because I was going to bathing suits when I was a little kid. And this is probably not appropriate, but I'm just telling you what I would do. I'd pull that JCPenney catalog out and I'd be at my grandma's house. We'd be buying stuff off the JCPenney catalog. You don't do that now, right? You go on your phone and what do? You ship it to your house. And so when you start looking at businesses, one of the best ways to protect your investment is to buy a diversified investment portfolio, right? Having a little bit of everything. We had a customer a long time ago, it's not a customer anymore. He had all his money in IBM. This is 15 years ago. And I said, you're crazy. He's like, well, IBM's stood the test of time. I'm like, IBM's a dinosaur, they're dying. And what do you guys think? What was a better investment 15 years ago? IBM or Google, Facebook, which, Apple, and Amazon? What do you guys think? Who do you think made the most money? Any of those companies destroyed IBM from return. IBM hadn't done much money at all. And so the thing about it is, that's the risk of putting all your money in one thing. So one of the biggest things as investors, as long as you have a little bit of everything, historically, you make it through the times. People say, let's talk about Volkswagen. Everybody ever heard of a company called Volkswagen? Who started Volkswagen? Anybody know? The Nazis. Guess who owns Volkswagen today? The Nazis' kids. Okay? So the thing about it is, if you are a stockholder in Germany and you own Volkswagen, do you still have some of your money? Yeah. The richest people in Germany are kids of ex-Nazis. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you as an investment standpoint, if you can survive that, you can probably survive quite a bit of stuff. Now maybe we shouldn't have let them keep their money, but what did we do? The Americans made a decision, we needed people that could run a factory. So who did they employ? Ex-Nazis. They said they want to send a spaceship to the moon. Who did they employ? Ex-Nazis. Right? And that's basically when you look at investing. And so that's how you look at it. Investing has been around so long at this point that it's crazy when people think that it's going to die out. The first person to come to America was Christopher Columbus, at least in modern times. Why did he come here? Money. He had the Spanish and the Portuguese had just kicked the Muslims, the Moors, out of Europe, and they wanted a way around to India and China to make money without going through the Muslims in Constantinople. And so they told Christopher Columbus, they wrote a contract, a corporation. You come to America, you get half of everything. And they loved giving half of everything until they decided what? There's a lot of stuff here. Let's imprison this guy. Let's get his stuff. But they came here for searching for money. And that's 1492. That's 528 years or 29 years ago. That's when he came to America. And so, but have there been some corrections in the last 500 years? Yeah. I mean, the Roman Empire did the same thing. The Roman Empire, when they went out, Julius Caesar. You guys remember Julius Caesar? You ever heard of him? Well, I've been watching a lot of videos of Julius Caesar lately. One of the first things Julius Caesar did is he conquered an area that he could divide out what? All the land and money amongst his who? His buddies. So they go into Germany, or they go into France. They really didn't like going to Germany. They went to France. They had a bunch of rich people there. They take all their stuff, and they what? Divide it out. And they still had investments in those properties for 1,000 years. And so when we look at corrections, September tends to be a rough month for the market. Let me give you some reasons why. So high earners tend to max out their 401k by April of each year. So right now, you could put in $19,500 into a 401k and $7,000 if you're over 50, so $26,500. Well, if you make $300,000 a year and you put in 20% of your paycheck into a 401k, how long does it take you to max out? That'd be 60 grand a year. You only put in 26.5, right? So how long do you max out? About April or May. So if you look at the market, one of the things interesting is seasonally, whenever January 1 opens up, one thing that always helps the stock market is all these wealthy people put their money in what? To avoid taxes, they start putting their money in now. Because when does everybody start thinking about taxes really heavy? January. About January, everybody starts calling me, when are my taxes going to be ready? Well, hadn't changed in the last 15 years. Sometime in mid-February, the 99s will go out. Right? But that's the bottom line. And so, but all these high earners are worried about paying what? Taxes. And so they start putting a lot of money away, what? In retirement. I'm a small business owner, right? So I can put money in my 401k up until October 15th of the next year. So when do I max my 401k out? I probably should do it earlier, but when do I do it? I max out for the previous year, April 15th of the next year. Tends to be. And so what happens is so many people around the country are doing this because of bad tax policy that tons of money goes to the stock market from January to April, which tends to help the market do what? And then right now, people are already maxed out, so what's happened? It's actually a net. It doesn't help at all, it hurts. So the second thing is, people go back to work in September. So how easy it is for me to take my kids on vacation right now? Terrible, right? I gotta get them all out of school, I gotta get notes, and we gotta catch them on homework. So what do I not do? And you're seeing that with the inflation numbers today, airline flights. Boom. Because people aren't traveling on vacation because kids are in school. And so typically this time of year, if you want to go to Disney World, you know what the best month to go is? August and September, yeah. Because nobody's there. It's a place for kids typically, and all the kids are what? I mean, I really thought, I plan to homeschool my kids so I can go to Disney World probably in August and September. It was part of the consideration because you wouldn't have to worry about vacation. You could do vacation anytime you wanted. And you can get better deals on trips when? August and September. But that's only true of Disney World. If you go to Europe, it's actually a little more expensive than it's different countries. So, also, when people go back to work, we start having what's called IPOs, initial public offerings. So companies will start selling their stock to the general public. A lot of them start selling their stock in September. They don't like to sell in the summer because people really aren't focused on investing, so they sell a lot of it when? In September, which is a mistake because they really should start selling it when? January and February. But there's a lot of companies right now selling stock. But when you put more stock out there, when there's more supply and there's less demand, what happens to the price? It tends to go down. Right? And then the next thing is earnings season. Earnings season is when companies tell us how much money they're going to make. Well, most companies don't report till October, middle of October. So we don't hear any real news on how they're doing. It's all speculation. But we've gotten some bad news lately, right? Afghanistan fell apart, which, by the way, has very little impact on investing. Actually, it increases how much money you block because people are going to buy more guns. But generally speaking, if Afghanistan is not a market, one of Afghanistan's problem is they don't want money. They just want to kill each other. So it's a really hard place to invest, right? It's not a place you can say to yourself, I want to put my life savings in Afghanistan. Not a great idea, right? It's an investment choice. But actually, do you guys know Afghanistan has the largest untapped gold and mineral reserves in the world? They have more gold in that country that's not being used in any country on earth. And they're not letting us get to it. Because they'd rather kill each other than be rich. It's hard to deal with people like that, right? It's hard to deal with. People also pull back some spending for Christmas. Think about it. You know why there's 50 ships out in Long Beach Harbor? What are they trying to do?
Christmas.
They're getting stuff here for Christmas. So when people say, oh, I don't know how this year's going to end. All those container ships tell me that people think they're going to sell a lot of stuff at Christmas. Try to buy some Gatorade, by the way. There's a Gatorade shortage. You guys know that? There's so many people with COVID right now. They're drinking Gatorade like crazy. I went to the gas station. I run this morning. I couldn't get a Gatorade. You know, there wasn't one at another gas station. I left that one, but I did the first one. And so, also another thing is cars. Used car prices went down. Why would used car prices go down this month? What tends to happen in September for cars? New models come out. So what happens is, car supply tends to go up right about now. And so when all these new cars, when there's more supply, what happens to the price? And so think about this. If you had a 2017 car, it's now 1 year older. Not in January 1, but in September. So that tends to also affect investing as well. This also is true for new iPhones. You know? If you ask Genesis and Kimberly, this is totally like, what would you guys rather have? A brand new car or a brand new iPhone? Probably a brand new car. But right now, what's more attainable, a new car or a new iPhone? New iPhone, right? And you want to buy it. Apple's supposed to think they have their big event in 2 days. So when are you gonna buy a new iPhone today if your phone's not broken? You're gonna wait till when? The new one comes out with a better camera. It's supposed to be waterproof. Yeah, I always get water on my phone, so I'm interested in it, right? And so it's when it comes out then. And also Christmas time. And by the way, they sell a lot of iPhones. If you want to wear an iPhone, Apple's the most profitable company in the world. Their most profitable product's the iPhone. They're a $2 trillion company, so they do affect the investment market. And so those are the things that really affect September. So one of the questions people ask is the market overvalued? Now, when you look at things from a historical concept, if you put all your money in the stock market the day before 9/11, how'd you do? Pretty darn good right now. Right? I mean, at the time, for the first 5 or 6 years, did you feel pretty good about it if you'd done that? No. But if you could look back at it today, and you could buy Apple for $10 a share, which is the price the day before, I think close to it. Was that a good investment? Yeah. You better believe it. I mean, if anybody would say, man, I wish I bought more stock. I mean, I always tell you the story in the office, but my first stock was a truck company called JB Hunt. I bought $2,500 when I was 12 years old. Today, that stock would be worth $200,000 plus, and I'd be getting $3,000 a year in dividends. What do you think I wish I had done? But the 10 grand I had in the bank, put it all in, right? And it's risky, but that's bought more and not sold it later. The thing is, and you start looking at stuff. I went to college, spent all that money. What if I had invested? That's how I should do, right? And so when we start looking at investing over time, it pays off. So the stock market trades 21 times profit. By the way, if inflation starts going down, what's also going to go down? Prices, maybe, but what else? Interest rate. When inflation goes down, what happens to CD rates? which is hard to believe they could go down further, right?
Right.
But if inflation goes down low, what are we going to have next? Negative interest rates. But they already had that in Germany. Right now they have negative interest rates right now, today. They've had interest rates for years now, negative. Netherlands, negative rates. So the thing is, if inflation goes down, what tends to go down with it? Interest rates. Which also means the stock market's worth more. Because if you can only get paid, if your CD is going to pay you negative interest, what are people likely to do with it? Invest in something or bury their yard, right? They're going to take it out of the bank, they're going to do something with it. Right? You're going to buy land, you're going to buy investments, or you're going to bury it somewhere. Something's going to happen with it, right? If you do negative rates, money's going to leave the bank.
Yeah, Bitcoins.
Yeah, Bitcoins, yeah. That's one of the reasons why people buy Bitcoins. Gary's a big proponent for it. I think they're crazy, but that's my opinion. They've made a lot of money, though. They tell me I'm wrong. They tell me it's not hackable. You can't hack it. It's like telling me the Titanic can't sink. I don't like those kind of tyrants.
They say that's the new gold.
Yeah, and that's they're using the gold for limited supply. So the question is the market overvalued? 21 times profit, which is 5% a year, plus the dividend yield is 1.28% in the S&P, and the share buyback. By the way, we're going to see the biggest amount of shares bought back in U.S. history this year for companies buying their own shares back. Unfortunately, companies tend to buy their shares off early in the year. What month should companies probably buy their stock back? September. They can't buy it back until after they report in October. So here companies are, their stock gets cheaper because the market tends to go down in September, and then middle of October, they start saying they're going to buy it back, and what does their stock start doing? So they get screwed over because of the way they do that. They should change that. But they can't buy their shares back until they tell people they're buying their shares back. And they got a report to do that. So September tends to be a tough month. October at the end, and November tends to be what? Really, really good months. And so 2% share buyback, 6.28. So it's 7.28% versus a CD at 0.5. Stock market's not moving back. Now, obviously, I want to get into one more thing before we end it, but I didn't get to finish all this stuff. But from a matrix standpoint, it's like buying a house. To give you another example. Do you guys know what the median home price was for sale in 2007? In 2007, before the real estate market dropped, what was the average home price sold in America?
150.
A little higher?
225.
A little higher? Getting close though. You can guess, Kimberly, this is
250.
257. You know what it is now, this year?
375.
374, 900. Right? That's pretty perfect. So if you bought a house in 2007 before the financial crisis, did it take a couple years to make money? Yeah, but do you wish you bought more? Probably. You know what it was in 1980? After all that inflation was going on? 66,800. To give you some perspective, the Dow was 700 in 1980. 700. You see the stock market's made more money than the real estate market has? I mean, it was 700 in 1980, the Dow was. It goes down 700 points in a day now. That was the whole value.
They're paying interest rates of 14, 15.
Yeah. And the thing is, they considered housing overvalued then. But you see, one of the best things you can do as an investor is buy as much stock and as much real estate as you can. Because over time, they're the only things that tend to hold your value. Right? It's like this. Would you rather own all the people in the world or all the land in the world? All the people. Because if you got the land, you can't work it. Right? If you have all the people, you can work it. I mean, people talk about, one of the reasons why slavery died in America was it was inefficient. Because people that are slaves don't work very hard. If you have a mortgage and 3 or 4 kids, guess what you have to do? Work really hard. Because you've got to pay for it all, right? And guess what you get to do? You get to pick that. You're free. So you get to pick that decision. And so it's a much more efficient way to do business. And so, when we look at, one of the things I want to talk about, there's a new bill for Irs Enforcement. These are one of the things that gets caught that people don't talk about much, but it will affect your life. So the IRS has asked the federal government to require every bank and investment institution to show when money comes in or money leaves your checking account. Why would they want to do that?
So you get your fingers on it.
Yeah. Think of it this way, right? If I tell you I make $100 grand a year, but $200,000 leaves my business checking account, do you think I'm lying on my taxes? Maybe. Right? And so what the government's trying to do now, see right now you already get this. When you get your 1099, there's also a form we send out called a 5498. The 5498 tells you how much money you have in an IRA. Why does the government need to know how much money you have in an IRA? Why is it? By the way, that's the 2011 financial reform law, which was supposed to stop banks from being too big to fail. Why did they put a form in there for your IRA if they were concerned about banks failing? Get their tax money. Because if they see you have this much money in an IRA, how easy is it for a computer software to say, hey, how much tax is this guy paying? How much is in his IRA? Let's do some formulas. Right? And so what they're asking for now is every time you have a checking account, they send a form to the IRS that says how much money left your checking account, how much money in your checking account. And they can compare those numbers with your tax return. Right? Now, this is not getting a lot of attention, but that's probably more meaningful in everyone's lives here. And it's also a lot of work on us, right? Because guess what we're going to have to start doing? Doing the IRS's job for them. So we already do that with retirement accounts with 1099s. But now, anytime money comes in and out, they're going to get what? A notification. And so, when we start looking at this is a huge potential tax change. As more and more people don't use cash anymore, all the government has to do the government doesn't even have to raise taxes. Let me tell you right now. The government wants to raise taxes, all they get is one thing. Watch what people already should be paying. The government could get a lot more money if they just did what? Think this way, right? Our gross domestic product, you guys know what percentage of gross domestic product goes to taxes? It's like 16%. But yet tax rates get as high as 37 to 60%. But only 16% of the money out there actually goes to the IRS and taxes. What does that tell you about what's going on, really? People are cheating on their taxes en masse. This is why a sales tax is such a better idea than an income tax. Because everybody pays sales tax when you what? When you buy or sell. And it's so much easier to regulate and monitor because you just monitor when the transaction happens. When you pay your income tax, you're supposed to get all your stuff together at the end of the year, and you're supposed to what? Tell them what you're doing. But wouldn't it be much easier just every time you bought something, you paid your taxes? And here's the thing. When we talk about September being a weak month for the stock market, it's purely because of taxes and other things they did. Like all these reasons we gave here, people doing IPOs, earnings season, cars, iPhones, it's all connected to car companies do their new models in September because they report in October. Do you think the CEO of Ford, what does he want to tell investors he's doing? Have you seen our new F-150? It actually gets 400 miles of charge. When's he gonna make that announcement? When the new model comes out, which is when? September. And why do they do it September 15th? Because they report in October. It's not very challenging. And they don't want to do it during Christmas because nobody cares. But everybody starts buying cars for what? Christmas. Here's your Christmas gift, honey. Here's a new F-150. Right? And so, if you look at 401ks, why do people put so much money in 401ks at the beginning of the year? Because of income tax. Right? And so they try to get in there where they're really thinking about taxes. But if they did taxes on a sales tax basis, they wouldn't look at that. So one of the reasons why September tends to be a rough month is all these factors of unintended consequences. But the good news is, and the good news for investors is, there's a really good month, and that's called October and November. And they come very quickly, right? So, and we all know, even if you have the worst moment, at least historically, the market comes back. It's just a matter of when. I mean, everybody that looked at Apple when it got down to $3 a share, when it was $10 a share, well, I could have bought it for $3 a share. Well, actually, right now, it's like $1, or actually been 40 cents a share when it got really cheap. But people would look at it and say, man, why did I buy it at $10? I could have bought it for 40 cents. But I would tell you, your better deal is, man, I got Apple at $10. You know, I got JB Hunt before they did 5 stock splits. Right? Or 6. And so that's how you got to look at it as an investor, because this is something out of control. Do you have any questions about this?
Well, at the end of October is when the federal government ends their budget. And it's November 1st they start.
Correct. So the government tends to award all their spending as well. That's another thing I didn't talk about. You are 100% right. Is the federal government has a stupid system in place. You know what that system is? Let me give you an example. Let's say you're the federal government and you had $1 million in your budget that you haven't spent yet. If you don't spend that money, what happens next year? You lose it in your budget the next year.
Right. Businesses like that too.
So government goes in, and so if you're a bureaucrat and you're like, God, I got $1 million in my budget. Why don't we rent out the Opryland Convention Center and let's do a party? And we don't care if we spend $500 out of room, because what do we have to do? So I'll give you an example. So my dad does government contract work. Probably shouldn't say this. And I'm not going to say it anyway. But the thing is, some of the things they bid on, they will buy, some companies in the government have bought computer systems 4 years earlier because they had to spend the money at the end of the year. And guess what they did to the computer systems? They put them in storage. And so then they've come to his company later and said, we bought this from you 4 years ago, we now want to install it. And what do they tell them? It's out of date. If you buy a new one, it'll save you money versus the old one. But what does the government do? They deploy the old one for costing. It costs more money to deploy the old one because they have to go back and get people that know how to use the old ones because they're out of date than it does to buy a new one. And that's because a bureaucrat, if they don't spend that money by the end of the year, they lose it next year. This is why government spending can never get under control. Because if you're that person and you have to spend $10 million, you worry about next year when you don't have what? The funding. So you spend it now in case you might need it later. It's like, you know, I got $1 million in my checking account. You never know what could happen. Huh? What could happen? Are you a drug dealer? I mean, what could happen that would cost you $1 million? I mean, the thing is, it doesn't do any good because you're worrying about an emergency that'll probably what? And if you need $1 million in cash one day, you're involved in something that's probably not legitimate. You know? If you're an individual, not a CEO company. And so that all this stuff plays into that spending. And usually, the government starts spending that money in October, their year end is September. So, yeah, but that's what, when you look at investing, that's how we look at stuff. So but the good news is it's close to being over. But do pay attention to that law about bank accounts, because I'm telling you, they're gonna get that in there. They're gonna go in there, and the government is gonna now get access. They already get certain data in your checking account. They're gonna get even more data, and that's gonna be whatever the bill passes. That's gonna be snuck in there, guaranteed, right? It's funny to me too. One of the things people says, "Well, the government can't find my Bitcoin." Oh yeah. You know, people have been paying taxes on Bitcoin last year? I thought this was so secure, no one knew what was going on. Huh? They're paying taxes on it, which means the government, what? Knows what's going on. They know about it. I always remember that, I guess it was the spring, when we had that pipeline get hacked, the Colonial pipeline. Remember, they cut all the gas fuel off to Tennessee and Atlanta, all those areas. And when they hacked the gas pipeline, they paid them in Bitcoin. Well, you know what the government did after they paid them? They stole it all back. Wait a minute, I thought they couldn't be stolen. Well, they broke their password. You think anybody in this room's password could be broken? Mine would be hard. I'll tell you that, right, Genesis?
Yeah.
It takes some work. And you probably have to have my cell phone, because you're going to have a gun in my head. But the point is, that's what it's going to take. Because my passwords aren't easy, to get. But the thing is, and those hackers' passwords weren't easy either. They have something out there that we don't know about. Shocker. Probably something they spent all that money on before the end of the year, 10 years ago, that we weren't paying attention to. But anyway, thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live. Appreciate your time. And have a great day.